filmed a commercial while standing on top of the graves of dead American war heroes. I am surprised he didn't try to sell us sneakers or trading cards or Bitcoin or the rest of his shit. And his staffers assaulted a woman employee at Arlington National Cemetery, and he blamed the families of the dead because his campaign broke the law, and his fascist gang of thugs is running wild with this as if Kamala Harris has anything to do with it, and 8 days later there still isn't a Senate investigation or a Defense Department investigation or a real journalistic investigation, and one of them better be started goddamned immediately. And the media continues to cover up for Donald Trump. Cover up. Not the cover-up of his campaign emails hacked by a foreign government and sent to the New York Times, Washington Post, and Politico. Not their cover-up of that story, because this time that matters. Not the cover-up of the reported $10 million bribing of Trump just before the 2016 election by President El-Sisi of Egypt. Not that cover-up by the major newspapers and by the Department of Justice, which should just publicly release all it has on the Egyptian bribe, and if it won't, Biden should order it to. Not that cover-up. The cover-up of Trump, grinning like the psychotic that he is, thumbs up, violating all codes of decency and respect for veterans, which can only be reestablished in this country if we prosecute scumbags like Trump who help to tear them down every day. The cover-up of him illegally filming a commercial for his campaign to end democracy and filming it in a place marked no political activity. The cover-up of whoever hit an Arlington National Cemetery employee and how they hit her. And the cover-up of why she is now too afraid to proceed or to go public. Where is the daily pounding on this utterly, transcendently disgusting story, this deeply meaningful story, and most importantly, for the simpletons running places like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Politico, this really easy-to-follow story? I give the New York Times some credit for paying some attention to this story, but even they have let it slide, even as the Trump campaign continues to use the video, illegally shot, not only to promote his campaign, but also to try to smear the vice president because she didn't literally dance on the graves of soldiers alongside Trump the way Trump did. But even this, from the Times, this is 6 days old. Quote, the family of a Green Beret who died by suicide after serving 8 combat tours and is buried at Arlington expressed concern Wednesday that Trump's campaign had filmed his gravesite without permission, as Trump stood in an area where campaign photography is not allowed. Relatives of Master Sergeant Andrew Marchesano issued their statement 2 days after Trump's visit, which also included a confrontation between members of the Trump campaign and an Arlington employee. The former president's campaign took video in a heavily restricted section of the cemetery known as Section 60, which is largely reserved for the fallen veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. A woman who works at the cemetery filed an incident report with the military authorities over the altercation, but the official, who has not been identified, later declined to press charges. Military officials said she feared Mr. Trump's supporters pursuing retaliation. Unquote. You will recall that the worker who asked them to stop was yelled at by Trump goons, then abused physically in some way. We still don't know if it was a tap on the shoulder or a broken goddamn jaw. Then, when the story of how the Trump people trampled the graves of the war dead at Arlington National Cemetery, this Trump spokesclown Stephen Chung said the woman who tried to stop them was, quote, suffering from a mental health episode. And this phony Trump patriot, Chris LaCivita, the Swift boat asshole, called her a, quote, despicable individual who does not deserve to represent the hallowed grounds of Arlington National Cemetery. And half the media, including the Times, covered up the fact that this idiot LaCivita indeed wrote hallowed, as in hollowed out conscience, instead of the correct word, which is hallowed with an A. And by the way, when the Trump campaign issued a statement from Senator Tom Cotton, who is a candidate for dumbest man alive, but he looks serious, so Trump likes him, the quote from Cotton misspelled the word cemetery. And you're goddamn right it matters, because it's the Arlington National Cemetery, and since literally the Civil War, when we seized it from the traitor Robert E. Lee, it has been our most hallowed ground, this cemetery, and these Trump idiots can't even get that part right, let alone the laws right, or the respect right, or the solemnity right required of anybody who goes there. I mean, do you know who the Sullivan brothers are? They are in Arlington, too. They're going to be there for a while. They're in Section MC, basically across the street from Section 35. They're the equivalent of about 3 city blocks away from where Trump shot his commercial. The former Marine and former Wall Street Journal reporter Ben Kesling brought this up. The Sullivans were 5 brothers from Iowa who served together in the Second World War on the same ship, on the light cruiser USS Juneau, and it was sunk by the Japanese at Guadalcanal on November 13th, 1942, and they all died. All 5 of them, all 5 brothers. Trump could have taken 5 minutes to go and salute them, or 5 seconds to salute anybody at Arlington. Even Robert F. Kennedy Sr. But hell, as Kesling notes, this isn't the first time Trump specifically ignored the Sullivan brothers. Waterloo, Iowa, named its convention center after them, and Kesling was there when Trump campaigned there more than 8 years ago. And just to be as cynical as possible, you go to the Sullivan Center, it's a layup politically. There's a big picture of them, their story, their deaths, where they are now. Unbelievably tragic story. Trump didn't pose with the picture. He didn't reference them in the speech at their center. Just like a week ago yesterday, he just went to Arlington as he'd gone to Waterloo just to sell you more shit. And F the Sullivans, and F the soldiers in Afghanistan, and especially F this Arlington employee. And after yelling at the employee, after touching her, slandering her, questioning her mental health, questioning her patriotism, threatening her in some way, when it was reported that she initially filed a report, then declined to pursue it at Joint Base Meyer-Henderson Hall in Virginia for fear of retaliation, this breathing cartoon spokesman, Stephen Chung, went in for another hit, quoting him, "That is ridiculous and sounds like someone who has Trump derangement syndrome," unquote. You know who has Trump derangement syndrome? Trump. Trump has Trump derangement syndrome. He's the one with the derangement. Oh, by the way, there are 2 fatally flawed strains of pseudo-logic operating within our newsrooms that are covering up for Trump about Arlington and all the other stories. One of these strains is, as the saying goes, that this is another opportunity for news organizations with vestigial and long since expired reputations for being liberal, like the Times could be mistaken for liberal anymore. It's an opportunity for them to comply in advance in case Trump regains power. The other pseudo-logic is this claim that Trump people continue to belch, that they have exculpatory video of this incident with that crazy National Cemetery employee, and it'll show you, and don't you dare criticize Trump because you'll look really stupid when we release the video and take our revenge. And there are 8th graders starting at school newspapers this week, this minute, who know there is no video, that the only video Trump has, he shot illegally, and used all of it illegally for an illegal campaign ad. But don't try explaining that to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Politico, because for them to say there is no video requires them to say something. And the point right now is for them to not say anything. 2 generations of the fascist Republicans working the refs of the media of this nation, plus the ever-spiraling gyre of the shrinking news business, have, in short, worked. Democracy may die in darkness, but inside the Washington Post, the real fear is the Washington Post will die because somebody there said something. Now, when others say something, when the family of the PTSD suicide whose grave was shown by Trump without that family's permission, when they say something, then the Times or the Post or the others will go just far enough out onto that limb to point at what they said and say, oh, please don't hurt us, right-wingers. Keep buying our shit newspapers. Trump blamed the family of the soldier he was supposedly honoring. It wasn't us. We just saw it on the TV. Then and only then will they report something like this.
Should your campaign have put out those videos and photos?
Well, we have a lot of people. We have people, TikTok people. We're leading the internet. That was the other thing. We're so far above her on the internet.
But on that hallowed ground, should they have put out the images of those?
I don't know what the rules and regulations are. I don't know who did it. And it could have been them. It could have been the parents. It could have been somebody.
It was your campaign's TikTok, though, that put out the video.
I really don't know anything about it. All I do is I stood there and I said, if you'd like to have a picture, we can have a picture. If somebody did it, this was a setup by the people in the administration that, Trump is coming to Arlington. That looks so bad for us.
There ought to be a story in every newspaper every day demanding that the Trump campaign release the video showing it was the woman employee who attacked the Trump campaign goons. The video that doesn't exist. Because otherwise he gets away with it. Like he's getting away with the Egypt bribe. Like he's getting away with whatever was in the emails the Iranians hacked, because this election, foreign hacking matters. Like he's getting away with saying Kamala Harris treated Mike Pence terribly because she told him to stop interrupting him during the debate, as opposed to, the whole gallowsy, hangy thing that Trump did. Like he's getting away with the Willie Brown helicopter flight logs from when Brown slimed Kamala Harris. He's going to release them from 10 years ago, only it wasn't 10 years ago, and they didn't talk about Harris. And for that matter, it wasn't Willie Brown, and it wasn't 10 years ago, and it wasn't a helicopter, and it wasn't in San Francisco. He's getting away with it. And you get away with it when the media covers up for you so thoroughly, so automatically, as the Times and the Post and the Politico operations of this world, and all but a few others are, so thoroughly, so automatically defaulting to covering up for Trump, not wanting to touch it. It's too much trouble. It's a third rail. Nothing good can come of it. Everybody knows he's crazy. We can't report this. They're doing it so thoroughly that the Trump campaign and the Trump psychopaths don't even have to bother to cover it up themselves anymore. By the way, the Arlington National Cemetery employee slimed and manhandled by the Trump campaign in ways we still don't know. She doesn't have to, in effect, press charges. The Army can take it from here. The evidence is the commercial. The Trump physical attack on her is almost unbelievable, but in one context, it's unnecessary to this story. The laws were broken. Whether they beat her over the head with a tire iron or they said, sorry, ma'am, and bowed on the way out. And the breeze was too strong for her. But you're not going to read about that either because the media is so broken. It was broken in 2016. It tried with some success to fix itself in 2020, but it's now broken in new and worser ways. Joe Scarborough, who has unsuccessfully tried to purge from the internet all those photos of Trump standing next to him, like Scarborough, was also a tombstone, and both of them are grinning like con men giving the thumbs up sign. Joe Scarborough, his show followed up on the CNN Kamala Harris interview last week with a focus group of mixed race voters. And sure enough, one of them, a guy named Adul Ali, just happens to echo this Trump insult to everybody in the world, almost word for word, quoting from the Scarborough focus group. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. I don't know, is she Indian or is she black? Unquote. This Adul Ali is a Trump podcaster running for Congress as the Republican in the North Carolina 12th Congressional District as a Trumpist. And guess who never mentioned that? Joe Scarborough and his people and MSNBC. And they matter-of-factly told the website Mediaite, sure, they knew he was a Republican running for Congress. They just didn't mention it. That's where we are again. The media is pitted against the Democratic candidate because bluntly liberals do not punish bad media. I don't care about that. I think the Democratic candidate can handle it for herself. What I'm worried about is this also coincides with the reality that the media is pitted against democracy as a result of this. Stand up for democracy. You guys, you're all going to wind up in the camps with us. You saw this from Politico? Next question. Harris evades questions about her identity. This was in the wake of the CNN interview with Kamala Harris, which admittedly didn't provide a lot of headlines. And Kamala Harris did, as I've said before, showed restraint I could never muster in 35,000 lifetimes. They read her the Trump quote about turning black, and she just went, same old playbook, next question. It was a dignified answer to a piece of shit. Next question, Harris evades questions about her identity. Well, the blowback on this, the ratio of, let me see if I got this right, the ratio on the tweet was 57 million to 3. That's a lot, isn't it? I made those numbers up. But what the hell, it's Politico. Politico then changed in a matter of, I guess, 3 hours or so, to Harris sidesteps the spotlight when it comes to her identity. And, of course, the picture of her from the video still says, next question, Harris evades questions. And then they did a little thread. For the record, this replaces a deleted tweet to better reflect Harris's response. It's a funny way to spell apology. We're idiots. We're Politico. We're run by a German right-winger. We have retreads who got fired from every other news organization in the world. You saw this from the New York Times? They got something wrong. They tried to fix it. They got it wrong again in a different way. You saw this? The Moms for Liberty can get a bit carried away. One of their local chapters once accidentally quoted Adolf Hitler. He alone who owns the youth gains the future. Well, that's fun. Accidentally. The Moms for Liberty can get a bit carried away. One of their local chapters once quoted Adolf Hitler. He alone who owns the youth gains the future. A correction was made on September 1st, 2024, the Times wrote. An earlier version of this article incorrectly said that a local chapter of Moms for Liberty had accidentally quoted Adolf Hitler in a newsletter. The group, which later issued an apology, was aware that the quote was from Hitler when the newsletter was published. Well, the Times correction is wrong. They didn't just acknowledge that they were aware Hitler said that. They defended quoting Hitler. After people in their own organization threatened to shut this chapter of Moms for Liberty, which is a brand name, after that, then finally they apologized. You saw this from Puck News, from this perpetual hot and cold running clown Dylan Byers, representing the closed ranks of political media. Fascist propagandists are not really fascist propagandists. Fox News is just another flavor of news, right? And it's like MSNBC. It's a different kind. One is sweet, one is sour. You decide which is which. Not even the fascist propagandists whose names came up in the Dominion lawsuit and are shown in text trying to get their own network to take back their call of Arizona for Joe Biden in 2020. They're not really fascist propagandists. They're the same as everybody else. This is what Dylan Byers wrote. First, the perceived bias of television news networks is almost always a red herring. Bullshit. Of the three well-known popular television networks, add Fox and CNN, let's make it 5. I've worked for NBC, I've worked for Fox, I've worked for CNN, I worked locally for ABC and CBS. Why, that's a complete set. Guess what? The perceived bias of television news networks is almost never a red herring, actually. But he goes on, all available evidence suggests Fox's Brett Baier and Martha MacCallum would be equally responsible moderators or interviewers of either candidate. Likewise, NBC's Lester Holt and Savannah Guthrie. By the way, Savannah Guthrie and Lester Holt, perfectly nice people, ciphers. There's nobody there. They're television performers. At one point, each of them was a newsman or newswoman, but they're ciphers. Martha MacCallum is a Republican who often advocates for right-wing causes on her show and takes a right-wing slanted point of view. And as I said, Brett Baier is in this huge lawsuit demanding that his own network, and he's the newsman at it, demanding that they put Arizona back in play because it's making everybody look bad. For all the mission creep, Dylan Byers, right? If anybody knows creeps, it would be Dylan Byers. For all the mission creep and conflicts of interest in TV news these days, all of the major companies, yes, even Fox, employ capable newsmen and women whose reputations, like those of the networks that employ them, depend on their ability to moderate a debate or conduct an interview with journalistic integrity. I'm waiting for the punchline to this, in which it turns out Dylan Byers does not own a TV of any kind. A quick run of the polls. New York Times, in swing states, the number one issue in swing states for women voters is no longer the economy, it is abortion. ABC Ipsos, Harris by 6 over the weekend. Favorables good for her, and for Walz not so hot for the Republicans. Widening her advantage among women in the new ABC News Ipsos poll. She now leads by 13 points, 54 to 41. Among the men, Trump leads by 5, 51-46, which is declared not statistically significant. Between the lines, to use the phrase, the female-male change occurs among pasty white people. Quoting it, white women have gone from 13 points for Trump pre-convention to a virtual dead heat, Trump +2. Now, white men from plus 13 points for Trump before the convention to plus 21 points now, according to the ABC News polling director. So the women are all even, and the men are even more for Trump than they were before. And this isn't really a poll. This is the oops, those were internal numbers. I didn't know they'd go public from where they went public in the Boston Globe. Tom Mountain, who had served as one of several vice chairs for the former president's effort in Massachusetts, wrote in an email to Trump volunteers in the state that the campaign has determined that New Hampshire is no longer a battleground state. Advised supporters to instead direct their attention to Pennsylvania. The GOP, the Boston Globe says, had been bullish about winning New Hampshire before President Biden dropped out. In the email, Mountain, former official with the Massachusetts GOP, said Trump was, quote, sure to lose by an even higher margin in New Hampshire than he did in 16 and 20, citing campaign data/research. Can you guess where I'm going with this for the the joke that ends this segment. He claimed resources, the Globe continues, would be suspended and the campaign would not send Trump or high-profile surrogates such as his sons. Well, thank goodness for small blessings, New Hampshire. The email was obtained by the Globe and confirmed with multiple recipients. Trump campaign official Tom Mountain has now resigned, thus making a molehill out of a mountain. Just sitting there on a tee. All right, if you're new here, thanks for responding to the advertising. Appreciate it. I put a new one of these out, usually 40 minutes to an hour in length, every night, just after midnight. A version goes up on YouTube about 5 a.m. So this is the Tuesday edition or the Monday Bulldog edition that you're listening to now. Starting next Monday, well, next Sunday night about midnight, that'll be 5 nights a week. Though the one Sunday night, Monday morning, that's going to be real short, 8 minutes, unless I get worked up. And, of course, as you know, I never get worked up. 4 is about the maximum I can handle. We got 8 weeks to go until the election. If I can ask you to do something, like listen, the least I can do is actually add the 5th piece. Anyhow, back to this one. Also of interest here, it is amazing to watch right-wing racists and misogynists go so nuts over somebody like Kamala Harris. I don't know if you noticed this, but she's a woman of color. That the misogynists and racists and their defenses melt. And they all default to assuming she's where she is because of, quote, puppet masters and or, quote, oral sex. Worst persons in the world is next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead of us on this edition of Countdown, the college year has just begun. The pro football year starts day after tomorrow. These things may combine to mean many things for you. For me, they combine into only one story. The day one of the most infamous mistakes in football history led my college professor to have to talk himself out of taking it out on everybody in his course by failing us all. F's for everybody. You get an F, and you get an F, and you get an F. Next, in Things I Promised Not to Tell. First, there are still more new idiots to talk about. The daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's worst persons in the world. The bronze. Fellow's name is Peter J. Hassan. He is an editor, the editor, it's hard to say. They won't assume responsibility at the Free Beacon, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's free. Peter J. Hassan is, we think, the person behind the big story on the far right that Kamala Harris should not be president of the United States because nowhere in her past resumes, autobiographies, or campaigns does it say she worked at McDonald's. You may have heard she worked at McDonald's. New, writes Peter J. Hassan, and there's a picture of Mickey D's, at least the logo, the golden arches, and next to a picture of that is a picture of Kamala Harris looking concerned as she holds a microphone. New, Kamala Harris's missing summer job at McDonald's job. Kamala Harris's missing summer job at McDonald's job? The guy has a blue check on Twitter X, and he didn't edit this. Kamala Harris's missing summer job at McDonald's job. I got a new job for you, fella. And it is not in the grammar police. Her resume and job application a year after graduating college, Free Beacon obtained through FOIA, didn't mention it. Yeah, okay. Neither do either of her books or either of the biographies on her. Exclusive report from Chuck somebody and Andrew and Simon something. Peter J. Hassan, editor He offers subscriptions to his feed in which he writes things like Kamala Harris's missing summer job at McDonald's job, her resume job and job application job, a year job after graduating job, college job, beginning to sound like a Monty Python script. In any event, I'd like to just point something out. This is the Vice President of the United States. Why on her resume, even when she was just a graduate from university, why would she include a summer job at McDonald's? No offense to anybody who's ever had a summer job at McDonald's, but I'll just point something out. I have not had a lot of jobs in the real world. I've been in media almost all of my life. However, one summer, I had a job once with real work involved in it, something between freelance and independent contractor. I was 16 years old, and I managed to figure out that instead of trying to buy and sell the baseball cards that came on the back of Hostess cupcakes and other Hostess confectionery and baked goods in the summer of 1975, instead of simply buying the boxes retail or maybe even wholesale, there was a place called the Hostess Thrift Store in which they would sell day-old or two-day-old or a couple of hours past the expiration date bread and other baked goods for lower prices. And then, if they didn't sell, I wondered what happened to them. My dad and I went to the one nearest our home. We went in and talked to the guy, and he said, well, after that, they all go in that dumpster over there. I swear to God, as big a dumpster as I've ever seen in my life. The ones in the dumpster fire memes, not as big as this dumpster. And in that dumpster were all the boxes with the baseball cards on them. And where do they go from here? Well, we send them to Jersey, and they feed them to the hogs. My job, and I created this job. I was a job creator at age 16. My job was I paid this guy a fee to hop into this dumpster with an X-Acto knife and cut the baseball cards off the boxes before the boxes and the now, 3-week-old Twinkies and ding-dongs and everything else that they sold went out to New Jersey to be fed to the pigs. The smell of a 6-day-old Twinkie is, contrary to rumor that they have the shelf life of a cockroach or a rat or, I don't know, radioactive carbon dating material, a 6-day-old Twinkie left out in the elements begins to smell. 600 or 700 of them, and the bugs that accompany them, they smell bad too. But I went in there for hour after hour cutting these things off, and frankly, I was able to sell them for about $1 a piece. I must have gotten about 1,000 of them. You know what? I did not mention this on any of my job applications in the, 49 years since then. This is what I was doing 49 years ago, and for some reason I left it off my resume. I have a copy outside of this studio right now of my resume from 1979, which includes things that I don't know why I put them on, like my height and weight. Who needs a height and a weight on a resume? But there it was, I guess for television purposes? I don't know what I was thinking. It says height and weight. It does not say Hostess Dumpster Diver, Hostess Thrift Shop Dumpster Diver in 1975, and I had no intention of running to be Attorney General of any state, or a senator, or Vice President of the United States, or President of the United States. I didn't put it on my resume, and I've written now, I guess, 3 books that have included, at least in part, autobiographies. I haven't mentioned it in any of those either. I didn't put it on my resume. And this guy Hassan, you know him, Kamala Harris's missing summer job at McDonald's job, Hassan, he's in the Daily Caller News Foundation. I'm confident he hasn't put that on his resume. Kamala Harris didn't put her job at McDonald's on her resume, which would be the same thing as, if she worked at the Free Beacon, she wouldn't say, put that on her resume either. Morons. The runner-up, the silver, now it gets a little darker. Tulsi Gabbard. You remember Tulsi Gabbard? Every time you think there is some sort of bottom for old skunk hair, turns out you are mistaken. Tulsi, of course, is still mad that her bid for the presidential nomination in 2020 earned her exactly 2 delegates. She is now, though, dropped below that red line of respectability where you have to now not say her name without putting an obscenity in the middle of it. You know, Tulsi effing Gabbard. That's her name now because, as I quote, also Twitter X, Harris's CNN interview exposed her as insecure and weak, which of course is exactly the qualities that will make her, again, grammar is not Tulsi's strength, which of course is exactly the qualities that will make her the perfect puppet, controlled by the faceless, power-hungry warmongers who run our country right now. She will be the dream, quote, president, unquote, for the, you ready? Puppet masters, Tulsi Gabbard writes. Puppet masters, because she'll be so easy to control and influence. I don't know how many people there are left in this country who would not recognize the phrase puppet masters for what it is. The American Jewish Center and the SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, both identify the phrase puppet masters, the one Tulsi Gabbard used. They identify that phrase as an anti-Semitic trope. It's Jew hate in common parlance, and Tulsi Gabbard just used it and also made a grammatical mistake in there. So her next stop is clearly to become an editor of the Free Beacon. But our winner, how do you top that? Well, you move from anti-Semitism to pure misogyny and racial hatred and just grossness. And that's Eric Erickson. It's hard to believe now, but Eric Erickson, who's always been kind of a schmuck, has seen the entirety of the right-wing movement move past him as they have gone into proverbial, hostess thrift shop dumpster diving. He stayed right where he was, schmuck. And now he's seen as some sort of moderate who doesn't want Trump or Harris. But this is how disoriented Kamala Harris, being a woman of color, being an intelligent person, being a woman, how all these things have disoriented them beyond their ability to shut the F up. You remember Eric Erickson, apart from that joke I always use about him, that he's one of those guys like Lars Larson and Hugh Hewitt, came from a family so poor we could only afford the one syllable for our name. In the immediate aftermath of when the MAGA gun nut shot at Trump, he put out a tweet blaming it on MSNBC and Comcast. He's also the guy who 3 weeks ago, barely 3 weeks ago, wrote, "At this point, the GOP has so devastated Tim Walz, I wouldn't be surprised to see Josh Shapiro show up at the DNC as their vice presidential pick." Well, of course, as we know, he got that one right. Well, Eric's misogyny and racism is now leaking out of his ears. This is Eric Erickson talking about the Vice President of the United States and how she got to that position and what she's doing now running for president. This is him.
The people who are so willing to say, oh, we have to support Kamala Harris because she's going to stop Donald Trump. You know what? She's an authoritarian. Kamala Harris, did you pay attention to her record as Attorney General in California? You really want me to believe that we have to save democracy by voting for Kamala Harris? If Kamala Harris could get in office and ensure she'd never leave again, she'd do it. Kamala Harris has done nothing but climb the ladder of power since the moment she got up off her knees in front of Willie Brown, to put it bluntly to you.
Every Republican accusation is an admission. Just remember that. I would make the same slander about Eric Erickson, but if you've ever seen Eric Erickson, if you go look up the video that I just played there, you would know that if ever in his life he had gotten down on his knees, they would need a winch to get him upright again. Eric Erickson, you're worse than Tulsi Gabbard. Today's worst person in the world! Finally, to the number one story on the countdown and my favorite topic, me, and things I promised not to tell. So, September again. I literally don't know anybody who ever shakes the childhood dread of back-to-school days in August and the beginning of September. 3rd grade, high school, college, doesn't matter. 44 degrees, 94 degrees, doesn't matter. It's September, and by now the dread, even if you liked school, remains until the day you die, especially if it invokes memories like the one I have about the day I nearly failed a 4-credit course in college because of a fumble in a professional football game. 44 years ago this week, I actually walked reluctantly but proudly into a class at Cornell University, if I remember correctly, to get into Professor Joel Silby's 19th century American history course, 8 credits spanning 2 semesters. I had to get special permission from the history department because I was not a history major. I just took all the history classes they would let me, and this was one of the best ones. And I remember Professor Silby's first lecture and the accent and the mannerisms that quickly identified him not only as a fellow native New Yorker, but as a Brooklynite. And a Brooklynite fan of, as he quickly told us, the New York Football Giants. What Professor Joel Silby said next caused I think it was 200 or so other students in the lecture hall to laugh. All of them except me, because I was the sports director of the Cornell student-owned radio station, and in those days you could actually know everything about and everybody in all the national sports off the top of your head, and usually that meant you could figure out all the teams in all the sports that had the slightest chance of succeeding and all the teams in all the sports that did not, and the New York Football Giants did not. I want you to know I grade the papers, not the teaching assistants, me. And I happen to be a lifelong, therefore long-suffering fan of the New York Football Giants. I saw my first Giants game in 1945, and over the years, I happen to have developed this habit of grading your papers on Sunday afternoons and evenings right after I watch my New York Football Giants. So to some degree, great or small, your grade will depend on how well the New York Football Giants do in this 1978 National Football League season. 199 of Joel Silby's students laughed. I emitted a low moan. Since they had gone to 5 NFL championship games in the 6 seasons ending in 1963 and lost all 5, by the way, the Giants had had exactly 2 winning seasons, and they had lost 9 of 14 games the year before in 1977. Though they had opened this 1978 season with a narrow victory over a very bad Tampa Bay team, and the first half of their schedule had as many as 4 more opponents who they might be better than, they would be lucky to win 2 games in the second half of the season. When I got back to the radio station, I looked at the Giants' schedule and Professor Silby's class schedule, and I circled one critical day when the schedules converged. Sunday, November 19th, 1978. Our term papers were due on Thursday the 16th. He could actually read them all after the Giants-Eagles game that night and the following day. Amazingly, your New York Football Giants actually opened the season winning 3 of their first 4. In the middle of October, they were still 5-3, and in the history lecture room, Professor Silby was very happy, and he often recreated highlights of his glorious Giants' pleasing success, and he was furiously fanboying on the new quarterback they'd brought in from the Canadian League, Joe Pisarcik. If you are a football history fan, or God forbid, a fan of the New York Football Giants, you already know where I'm going with this. The Giants lost the next 3 games, and then our term papers were due on November 16th, and Joel Silby turned morose. And I was at the radio station watching the Giants-Eagles game of the 19th on a big black and white TV in the lounge when my nightmare unfolded. Impossibly, the Giants led the much better Philadelphia Eagles 14-0 after the first quarter. Pisarcik threw 2 touchdown passes. After the third quarter, it was still 17-6 Giants. Then the Eagles scored, and they were driving to go ahead with a minute and a half left in the game when the impossible happened. Deep in Giants territory, the Philly quarterback threw an interception. With 83 seconds left and in possession of the ball, the Giants led 17-13. The crowd at the radio station was ecstatic. I was even more ecstatic. All the Giants now had to do was stall and have the quarterback fall on the ball maybe twice. As if he had heard me, the quarterback, Joe Pisarcik, fell on the ball. Then he nearly killed me by handing the ball off to his running back, Larry Zonka, who plowed up the middle to get a first down and burn another 30 seconds off the clock. The Eagles called their last timeout. 31 seconds left. 31 seconds to my grade in Joel Silby's 19th century American history class, probably ending up being a half or maybe even a full grade better than I deserved. All Joe Pisarcik had to do was fall on the damn ball again, and it was over. However, on the Giants sideline, offensive coordinator Bob Gibson decided that the safe play, the winning play, was for Joe Pisarcik to hand the ball off again to Larry Zonka. Now, that might have been the right play, only Bob Gibson and everybody else failed to tell Larry Zonka. Larry Zonka assumed he was there just to block for Joe Pisarcik as Joe Pisarcik collapsed to the turf and ran out the clock and got me a better grade. Instead, Pisarcik handed the ball to where Zonka's hands should have been, except Larry Zonka was in a blocking stance, and Pisarcik, in fact, handed it off directly to Larry Zonka's helmet. I screamed. The ball bounced once off the turf and directly into the hands of Philadelphia cornerback Herman Edwards. I continued to scream. There was nobody near Edwards, and he scooted 26 yards into the end zone, and the Giants lost the damn game 19-17 in the last seconds. And as the Giants fans at the radio station shouted or moaned or swore, I could see Professor Joel Silby shutting off the TV, grabbing our papers, and sentencing us to hell. And I continued to scream. Our term papers were returned on Tuesday the 21st, just before school broke for Thanksgiving. I actually was thankful. I got either a B or a B+. I can't find the paper. It should be somewhere in a box. There was a rumor, which I was never able to confirm, that my B or B+ was the highest grade in the class. I can confirm I saw classmates, most far more prepared and astute than myself, most of them history majors, looking at their grades and blanching visibly. One girl cried, "A C? Really? A C?" Professor Joel Silby said much of our grade would depend on how well the New York Football Giants did in that 1978 National Football League season, and by God, they had just sustained a loss so bad that it is still talked about to this day. My classmates did not listen. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. There is a postscript. The postscript takes place 32 1/2 years later. I returned to Cornell in March of 2011 to give a lecture and teach a series of classes to students who no longer afterwards felt they had gotten their full money from the university. My alma mater was very kind to me. They gave me a tour of the secret places they never would have shown me when I was a struggling student, like where they kept Cornell's copy of the Gettysburg Address, and they promised me something special for lunch the first day. And sure enough, I was dropped off at a restaurant, and there, rising from a table to greet me with applause, were Cornell's official historian and former professor Glenn Altshuler, and their very famous history professor Walter Lefebvre, and, I swear, Professor Joel Silby. And they were fans of mine. Of course, I could not leave well enough alone. After a few minutes of very pleasant conversation with Mr. Altshuler and Professor Lefebvre and Professor Silby, I brought up the 1978 term paper Joe Pisarcik handoff story. Professor Lefebvre looked at Professor Silby like Professor Silby was out of his mind. "Is that true?" And Silby smiled and said, "Yes. Yes, it is." And then Joel Silby looked off into the distance, as if he were peering backwards through time. 1978, that's when you could really enjoy being a professor. He then looked back at me and smiled. "Keith, you won't believe this, but I actually graded those papers pretty fairly, and I didn't follow through on my original plan. After the fumble, I actually turned off the TV, and I sat there for a few minutes, and I asked my soul if it was okay for me to take my revenge on the universe by failing all of you." Lefebvre gulped. "Oh," said Silby, "it was so great to be a professor back then." I laughed so much I had tears in my eyes, and then Silby said, Okay, maybe I was a little unfair to you guys, but, it's the Giants. And you have to take this as a whole. The year they won their first Super Bowl, what was that, 86? The The final exam in that class was like 2 days after they finished the regular season 14-2, 8 o'clock in the morning. So I go to the final, see, which I never do. And I waited until they were all sitting there sweating. And I said, remember last September when I told you your grade will depend on how well the New York Football Giants do in this 1986 National Football League season? And there was just silence. And I said, well, if you didn't notice, they went 14-2. And I haven't been this happy since when they won the title in 1956. So guess what? There's no final exam. And nobody moved. So I said it again. There's no final exam. Go home. Go study for something else. You all get A's. And then there was a couple of seconds of silence, and they all simultaneously realized I was not kidding, and everybody cheered and ran out into the sunshine. So, with me and Professors Altshuler and Lefebvre now in tears, Silby said, see? It evens out. And I said, the hell it does. I graduated in 1979. How does a canceled final in 1986 even it out for me, fella? Joel Silby thought for a second, and then he said, well, I am buying you lunch. Forty-six years ago. What did I say? 43? 23? It was 1978. See, I was considered a math prodigy. However, this was when I was still very short and had blonde hair, all of which has changed. I just like to add and subtract numbers. Now I'm not even any good at that anymore. When we got finally to algebra, I would just sit and stare at the board and ask the math teacher which side was the question and which side was the answer, and I turned my head upside down, so I was looking upside down. That's when he said, take the class, pass, fail, and I'll pass you. 1978 it was. Anywho, I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Please share this podcast with somebody who does not yet listen. And again, if you're just joining us after the advertising, thank you kindly. Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, the musical directors of Countdown, arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Mr. Chanel handled the orchestration and keyboards. Mr. Ray was on the guitars, bass, and drums, and it was produced by TKO Brothers. Yes, every day we do this. It was 4 days a week, and it's 4 days a week this week. Next week, I'm going to start doing it 5 days a week, and as I said, Mondays will be brief. In any event, our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust. The sports music, we do sports segments periodically. The Olbermann theme from ESPN2 was written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. And my announcer today was my friend Larry David. Everything else was pretty much my fault. So that's Countdown for this, the 64th day until the 2024 presidential election, the 1,331st day since convicted felon Donald J. Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Use the September 18th sentencing hearing, if it happens. Use the mental health system. Use presidential immunity. The Supreme Theocratic Court has given it to you, President Biden. I say, if it's official, it's legal. Have fun. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow. Bulletins as the news requires. Until the next one, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.